the Finding Common Grounds conversation. Our intent tonight is to help strengthen the relationship between African American families and the Shaker Heights Police Department. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Deidre Storms. Thank you. And please put yourself on mute.
Thank you, Melanie. Good evening, everyone. I am Deirdre Storms. I'm a member of SAMS and a Shaker Heights City School District employee. And again, we welcome you to our conversation this evening. Before I allow for introductions, I do want to remind you that questions and answers should stay under 3 minutes for the sake of time. We will have an opportunity for questions to be put into the Zoom or the chat, and you can ask them directly. And also, this meeting is being recorded for possible future use. So if you can remain on mute until you have something to say, we'd appreciate it. At this time, excuse me, I would like to ask Mr. Hicks, who is joining us as a part of the Shaker Heights Max Scholars, to say a few words, and then we will turn the introductions over to the chief.
Again, hello, everyone. My role at Woodbury is I am the educational support specialist and administrative support for Woodbury. That's a whole lot of words to say that I try to keep as much off the desk of the 3 administrators, along with the role of being an advisor for Woodbury Max Scholars. When Ms. Harris first told me about this, it was just like the stars aligned. For my scholar curriculum this year, and I'm going to keep this real brief, is I wanted the kids to create a journal. And because we know how we as adults, how we are experiencing 2020, but sometimes our kids, we don't have a clue as to what's going on with them. So I titled our curriculum for this year is 2021 and Me. And actually, when we return after winter break, I broke it down into different topics. We're actually going to be discussing policing. How are their thoughts as to what the Shaker Heights Police, our first meetings, we did COVID, we did family. Last Thursday, we did race. So this totally aligns itself with everything I'm trying to educate our kids with at Woodbury. So with that, I'll defer.
Chief DeMuth.
Thanks, Deirdre. Yeah, I'm Jeff DeMuth. I'm the chief of police, and I've been the chief since 2015. And I want to thank you, Mr. Hicks, for being a part of this discussion tonight. And thank you for the Woodbury Scholars for being here. And I'm glad that this has a lot to do with what you're teaching. And I would just say that, you know, if there's not enough information tonight for you, is there a way that we could set up another, and because of the pandemic, is there a way that we can set up another Zoom just with your classmates and you and me and whoever else that you think we would need in the police department to kind of have that, you know, educational environment and where they can ask questions and we can provide, you know, all sorts of information. I think it'd be a great opportunity if you're interested. So go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh, I most certainly am. Actually, that was my original plan to reach out. You know, I've met Detective Walsh and Officer Dunn that
Right.
We've actually, Mr. Miles and I have had them to come to the school to speak before. And that was my intent to reach out to the Shaker Heights Police Department to actually be a speaker to the scholars group. So we're right in alignment with each other.
Great. So, you know, please don't hesitate to contact us and where we can set this up, because, you know, that's a fabulous opportunity for us and for the young youth of Shaker Heights to kind of get together, talk, and really connect, and maybe, you know, and learn a little bit more about each other, which is really important. And I would also know you also know our chief prosecutor, Randy Keller, who is here with us tonight. He's, I always say, number one, he'll be a fabulous resource for you. But I always say, the city of Shaker Heights is so lucky to have Randy Keller as their chief prosecutor. I've been doing this over, I think it's 34 years now as a police officer and through the ranks. And I've met a lot of prosecutors, local, county, federal. I don't know anybody who is quite as gifted, not only in their oratory skills, but in their legal skills. And we're just darn lucky to have Randy Keller as our chief prosecutor. And we're lucky to have him here tonight. So before we get into it, Randy, is there anything you'd like to say?
I'm sorry, Deidre, I didn't hear you.
I was asking you to unmute, just if you did. We're good.
Oh, okay. Well, good evening, everyone. And, at the risk of sounding like just a couple of guys in the Mutual Admiration Society, that my views are exactly the same about the chief. We're an extremely fortunate city to have such a terrific chief. In the correspondence, well, before I do that, let me just share with you very, very quickly a little bit about who I am. I'm approaching 33 years as a lawyer. About 22 of those years now have been spent in law enforcement as a chief in 3 different jurisdictions now. I'm somewhere around 16 years or so with the city of Shaker. The information that we received asked us to do 2 things in the introduction, if we could. And the first one was to just say, a little bit about what we thought police reform was. And then the second thing was to say a little bit about what we think police reform is in the city of Shaker Heights. So generally speaking, it's a fair and accurate evaluation of policies, practices, and cultures within police organizations. And that's kind of the global generic definition of police reform. In Shaker Heights, though, I think we are very, very fortunate because we have a willingness to participate in these kinds of forums. And the one thing that I would stress to whoever is here with us tonight, and I'm going to continue to stress it, there's a wonderful African-American female chief out of Charlottesville that I recently had an opportunity to look at a webinar of hers for about an hour where she was interviewed. And one of the things that she spoke about was the importance of integrity of the heart. And so one of the things that I know about the city of Shaker Heights is that there's integrity of the heart of all of us, those who are participating, the officers that I work with every day. And that's going to bode well for all of these efforts that we are trying to accomplish in the city. So, I'm glad to be here. I too want to be the biggest possible resource that I can as one of the members of the Shaker law enforcement community.
Thank you for that. Do we have anyone that is participating on the call that would like to specifically ask about police reform in Shaker, what you think it should be, what it is you would like to see that Shaker is doing? Anyone?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay. Ms.
Hi,
Welchans?
again, I'm sorry, again, my name is Melanie Welchans. My question is, in what ways are the Shaker Heights Police Department bridging the gap between policing within the community?
So that's a pretty broad question. And I think, one of the ways that we will try to bridge the gap, as you put it, and we will continually try to bridge the gap, is try to educate ourselves and all of our officers in an ongoing fashion and in a fashion that allows us to understand the community in which we work in. I think the most difficult thing, or one of the most difficult things for our officers, is not really understanding entirely the city with which in which they work and the residents that they work for. And quite frankly, you know, especially in regards to situations involving race, right? Not everybody is up to speed in regards to the history of racism, racism in the as an law enforcement, and the racism, systemic racism in the institution of law enforcement, how law enforcement started, and many of the policies way back when were rooted in racism, how that has established culture. So within law enforcement agencies. So my point is that it's not only Shaker Heights, but it's many law enforcement agencies in Ohio and in America. And I think that's one way. That's just one way, our continuing education in that area. Second way is always been and will continue to be is our efforts in community engagement. What I do know and what we all know is that a community that trusts their police department allows us and gives us legitimacy within the community. And the way to build that trust is to build relationships. I've said this a million times and I'll say it again. And to build those relationships, we have to have that community engagement. Now, certainly the pandemic has really thwarted this for all of us. Policemen are no different. They're kind of scared too in regards to their, you know, their personal health. So they want to have as limited of contact as they can. But anyway, I think we've had a really good track record in regards to our community engagement for the last 5 years. I think our track record is excellent in regards to the education that I spoke to, and we're going to continue along those lines. And I think what we're doing here tonight, and I apologize, I know I should keep it to 3 minutes, Deidre, I'm sorry. I apologize for being so long-winded, but what we're doing here tonight, I hope gains traction with more people. I don't know if it's so effective that you have the police chief sit in front of everybody and he just espouses what he's doing in the police department as much as we should have roundtable discussions where residents and people of the community are able to sit down with us. And sometimes those residents in the community, they're the one who are talking and we just sit and listen. And sometimes those conversations may be uncomfortable for us as police officers, but we have to sit and listen and listen to the residents and listen to their experiences. Now, there's always going to be a natural defense from the police agency to and I mean defense, to stick up for what they believe is right and to explain why certain things are done. But I think what's really important, and Kim and I have talked about this previously, is that more of this, where we could bring community or residents into these small roundtable discussions. And again, it's not us speaking, it's the residents in the community speaking to us and letting us know how they feel and why they feel certain ways, good or bad. And Deidre, I'm sorry for going over my time.
That's okay. I think that was a good segue. I am going to call on, do we have any MAC scholars on the line? Okay, we don't have any students that are willing to speak up. So Mr. Hicks, I'm going to put you on the spot if I may. I would like to ask, you mentioned your prior conversations with your scholars and the young men or the young people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. Can you present to Chief DeMuth and Mr. Keller any questions or concerns that your students may have about the things that are going on right now and the reforms that is taking place or they think should take place? Because even though they're young, they see things that are going on nationally and right around them, and they have their concerns, they have their opinions. What can you share with us?
One of the things we talked about is I'm an advocate for the police. I understand they truly are needed and necessity, and we have to have them. And actually, one of my conversations with one of my students, he actually asked why. And I went into explaining to him that how anarchy, but then I had to break down anarchy, can occur if we did not have the police in place. But there's a delicate balance in trying to tell them that the police can be your friend as well as them upholding the guidelines and rules they have to do, enforcing the law. And that sometimes is a troubling issue, I guess, because what they see in the media this year, they have seen a lot of the negative things. But I do bring up one incident. Actually, I was writing down little notes as I was talking. I want to commend the Shaker Heights Police. There was a video that actually ended up on the news, I think it was this summer, that the police were called, kids were playing in the street, throwing balls, as I did as a child. You know, we threw footballs. That's just something we did as kids. But I guess a resident called the police. And when the police arrived, instead of chastising or immediately correcting the kids, he joined in. And it turned out to be one of my scholars at that time. And the rapport was excellent. I actually called the parent the next day to let them know I truly thought they did a great deal with how their son approached it. Now, on the other flip side of that is another group of kids I deal with are kids that are on the borderline. My scholar kids, they pretty much have good foundations, but I've worked with quite a few groups of kids. And one of my other groups is kids that are on the borderline. We're trying to keep them in line, but they are right there at the edge. And sometimes their reaction to things, which this is one of the main things I'm trying to teach them, how to manage their emotions. And I had a conversation today with a colleague at school, and we were talking about how, unfortunately, a lot of our African-American or Black male kids become irrational. They start throwing hand movements and body language and turning their backs and twisting and turning. So trying to explain to them that they're putting themselves in danger at times when they react in that way. But as far as police reform with that, I'm hoping that some police officers see that some of that is cultural and don't always become defensive when they see kids react that way. We're trying to unlearn them from their behaviors, but that is part of how they react to things. They become animated. And I think having some training as to how to calm down our kids, how to approach.
Did Mr. Hicks's audio go out for anyone else besides me?
Yeah, it went out for me too.
Okay, Mr. Hicks, we lost your audio. While you work on that, I want to ask Mr. Keller, because you did address this in one of our other forums. If you could, in 3 minutes or less, give us some background on what you are doing within the station to help to educate your officers as far as the cultural differences, the hand languages, things like that. And what can we share with our students to help them to diffuse the situations and talk themselves down? I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and then we have another question. Thank you.
Sorry, did you say that was addressed to me? I didn't quite hear you.
All right, I did. You addressed it before.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I heard you right, that you wanted me to answer.
Yes.
We have, for as long as I've been at the city, engaged in bias-based police training, community-based police training, issues of race and policing, not just on an annual basis, but we do it throughout the year. It comes into play in various smaller training scenarios. Every new Shaker Heights police officer, as part of his orientation process, spends a day with me to learn not just some of the areas of the law that are important and need to be emphasized. And it's not to say that they didn't learn them at the police academy, but we try to certainly re-emphasize those things. But the lion's share of that meeting, it centers around training them on race, policing, bias-based policing. And we have over the years, tried our very best to be innovative and different on an annual basis in terms of how we go about that training. Everything from a panel discussion that we had a couple of years ago with some teenagers and some officers. There were actually 3 African-American male Shaker students and 3 white police officers, and we sat down at the conference table and just had a discussion. We just talked to each other, and by all accounts, everyone was thrilled with that process. So we, on a regular basis, continue to try to enforce the importance of the foundational things that Jeff spoke to, of understanding why people may respond differently, or understanding why people may take a look at you and it's not you, it's the uniform, it's the badge, it's all the history behind all of that. And the importance of being sensitive to those considerations as you have a citizen police encounter. Now, likewise, on the other side of that, one of the things that I hope that we get a larger opportunity to do, not just through Mr. Hicks, but we have done some of it, and I'll be the first to say, and I know the chief agrees with me, that we can do a whole lot more, but we've gone out into the community and had community meetings and talked about, the nuances of an interaction with the police and what the police are looking at and what are the things that, perhaps may heighten an officer's concern about his safety and your safety versus the things that will calm those considerations down. And, it's statistically true that some of the more run-of-the-mill, if you will, encounters with the police end up becoming some of the more dangerous encounters with the police. So, we've done that. We are willing to do it into the future, and certainly want to go about, doing as much of that as we can, particularly with young people, but with everybody in the community.
Quickly, before we go to Tim's question, Mr. Keller, can you give me 3 bullet points that Mr. Hicks can take to his students, actions or reactions that they may present that could heighten a situation that they should think about or otherwise approach differently?
Right. I won't necessarily use the term heighten, but I can certainly give you 3 very quick ones. Number 1, understand that you are not going to be successful or unsuccessful right there in the street during that public encounter. So, approach it with the understanding that you just have to get through it and the facts will take care of themselves. But if you begin to start arguing and escalating about the propriety of the officer's behavior or the propriety of your behavior right then and there, the forum is not the correct one for you to make those arguments. The second thing is, understand that officers, and I can say this across the board, they want to go home just like you want to go home, and they want to go home safely. So the extent to which you can talk to them in a manner that is just, you're explaining yourself, but to Mr. Hicks' point, you're not beginning to gesticulate. You're not beginning to become, frustrated and angry at the police officer. You're in a position to make that situation end correctly. And the officer is faced with an obligation and a responsibility to do the same, because make no mistake about it, when the rubber hits the road, we're going to look at that body camera and we're going to look at the officer's behavior just as much as we're going to look at yours. So if the officer, when faced with someone who is speaking to them relatively calmly, explaining themselves, and that officer takes the situation to another level, I assure you he's going to answer to the gentleman on this call with us, and he's also going to answer to me. And I think the third thing that we can do, and this is going, and I'd like to come back to this at some point, but the third thing is we've got to understand how to build relationships. And even young people, they've got to learn how to build relationships, not just with the police, but it's a life skill. And there are some things that you can do in that regard. And I can come back to that later, because there is a point before we get off that I'd like to make. So
can I jump in there or no?
You can. I just want to ask Mr. Keller one more quick question.
Sure.
Because we are talking about minors at this point. So say there is a minor and they are approached by the police officer and the officer is asking them questions. At what point should the child say, I'll be happy to talk to you, but I'd like a parent present?
I think that the child can say that to the officer just as soon as that discomfort arises. Now, let me give you the law and let me give you the practical side of things. The legal side of things is that if you are merely a witness to something, I can talk to you. I can ask you questions about what you saw, what you witnessed, the extent to which you had a good opportunity to witness things or not. If you are implicated in some way in the offense, that's a different set of discussions. And you can certainly ask to speak to your parents, but it would take me a while to kind of get down into the weeds. But the reality is there are certain situations where the police can interrogate someone that is under the age of 18 without their parent being present. So I think the first thing that the child has to understand or think about is, you can say you want to talk to your parents right away. And I assure you, for the most part, we're going to accommodate that. The second thing is, understand, are you just being asked about what happened and you're not a suspect, so to speak, you're just a witness to what occurred? Then that needs to be explained to you by the police officer, and you need to understand that you're not in trouble, you're just sharing what you saw. And then thirdly, if you are indeed suspected of an offense, you can certainly ask for your parents at that point in time too, but there are some nuances to that, and parents need to understand that they can't always or necessarily walk into the police department and say, you cannot talk to my child until I see him. And there's a large body of law around that I can provide to everybody at a later date, but we'd be here probably for another couple of hours.
I think we'll table that perhaps for the next conversation of the Chief DeMuth.
Yeah, I just want to touch a little bit on something that Mr. Hicks said and some comments that Randy was talking about, and what I think, because we're really talking about police reform tonight, and I think they hit on some very important points. And we're talking about some of the mechanics, and I know that Randy was talking about the mechanics of how to act during a stop with a police officer. And Deidre, I know that I sent you the link for the what we call our reform matrix, and how we went about kind of amending and reforming some of our policies in regards to the idea of police reform. And that's kind of the mechanics of police reform. But I think in my eyes, and more importantly in police reform, is this idea, and Mr. Hicks was talking about it, and Randy was talking about it, is this idea of cultural competency. And what I do know as a police chief and being involved with this for the last 34 years, 35 years, is that there's a lot of ignorance that comes into play. And when I use that word ignorance, I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. It's just that the information or the education has not been provided to somebody. And when we talk about cultural competence, I think it goes both ways. It goes on the community side, understanding why the police do what they do. And then from the police perspective, understanding, and again, from the African-American community, understanding their culture and a little bit more about it. And Randy, I think it was Randy who talked, and we've or mentioned it today, and I was talking to Sergeant Grafton, who's on here today. It's really interesting, and I'm going to give I apologize, Deidre, I just have to get this out. It's really interesting, and I have to give kudos to Councilwoman Williams, who's on the call tonight, because she provided me the video to Chief Rochelle Brackney from Charlottesville. And I thought that video was excellent. And I thought a lot of her points were wonderful, and we can visit that later. And I took that video and I sent it out to my entire supervisory staff. And when I sent that video out to the supervisory staff, I also said, I used the words, and I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said, let's be honest. Much of the roots of law enforcement institutions are based in racism and oppressive policies and behavior. And what happened was, most of the supervisors were like, yeah, I enjoyed it, good points. But there are a couple were like, they thought that I was calling them a racist by mentioning those comments. And we talked for a while, and here's where the ignorance comes in. And I don't know if it's their fault or not, right? But they haven't been provided the information. I said, well, let's talk about a couple things. I said, I can give you examples of where the racist roots of law enforcement have grown into these institutions where we are right now. And the one supervisor I was talking to, I said, do you know about the sunset laws of the South? And he was like, no. I said, you don't? No. I said, are you aware of the Edmund Pettus Bridge? Do you know what that represents? Not really. So I explained the significance to that supervisor. And that's this ignorance that I'm talking about. And I will continue to talk about is that until we all get back to the idea of understanding history and the history of racism and how it affects the institution of law enforcement, we can't get any farther as a profession, because we as law enforcement officers have to understand that history before we move any forward in what we're trying to do. Because understanding that history will allow us to understand when we have an interaction out on the street somewhere and it doesn't go well just because, that person that we interact with, an African-American, hates us. Well, why does that African-American hate? Well, they don't hate us personally because they don't know us. But I don't have the uniform on right now, but they hate this uniform. And they hate that badge because they know the history behind what happened years and years ago. Yet our officers, our newer officers, or people that haven't been exposed to that history don't understand that. And when Ms. Welchans asked that question early on, that was kind of what I was getting to, is we have to get back to providing that historical basis to our law enforcement officers so they understand, and maybe it allows them to handle contexts on the street a little bit differently.
Thank you. Kim, your question?
Thank you. I had some original questions, and as I've been listening, some of them have been answered. So I just want to say the portion of my comment. I think endurance is an important word, or at least it's a word on my mind right now, because I know personally, I'm entering these series of conversations hoping that I have the endurance, because when it is a situation where we do invite plenty of people who we know need to connect, plenty of people who we know we need to hear the police chief talk about how past racism plays a part. They need to hear that. They need to know that this is a pressing issue, and they need to hear the direction that you're going in. But it gets frustrating when you're trying to build that relationship, and it almost seems as if the other side is a little reluctant and doesn't take advantage of the opportunity to connect. So I'm entering these conversations, reminding myself to have the endurance, to know that we're starting in small steps. Everything starts with a step. And tonight, while we may not have plenty on this call, we know plenty were invited and received the invitation. We need to find or make sure we can climb that wall that is a barrier to stop them from wanting to build this relationship, and have the endurance throughout this series of conversations to get there, and know that, again, it's a reason that we're doing this, and it's a reason that they're not here. So I think we'll get there if we, stay in that mindset. I did want to ask about the reform as it applies to Shaker Heights. And, we're coming up on our last 15 minutes. I wanted to make sure there was a takeaway or some information that is specific to reforms that are designed for Shaker Heights, things that are going to have an impact on the ground, an impact, as it relates to our kids having encounters with the police officers here in Shaker. Sorry, I know I probably went over my time too, but because it's so few, we have a small group, we don't have to be so sensitive about the 3 minutes. I should have said that earlier.
That's a good question, Kim, and I'm going to ask Mr. Keller or Mr. DeMuth to address that. There was another question, and perhaps you can address it at the same time. It was asked if there was reform implemented or in place before the Shaker Heights officer flipped off the Black Lives Matter crowd, or if something was put in place after the incident.
Can I?
Go ahead, Randy. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Deidre. This is an important point, and I've been thinking about this all day. And I'm going to try to say it quickly. I'm going to try to say it efficiently before we kind of get to the nuts and bolts of police reform in the form of that last question, because Kim alluded to something that's very important. I started out, and this has stuck with me, integrity of the heart. So one of the things that I hope happens as we continue to try to build trust in these relationships is that we can get to a point, because of how hard we're working to show our dedication and our sincerity to wanting to listen to the community and be a part of the community and try to find common ground, is that we can continue to work on building these relationships. But I do want to share with you one internal problem that we have as an organization when we come back to the personnel and try to explain to them the importance of all of this dialogue, this information, and becoming better and studying harder to get better at their craft in terms of community policing, and in particular in the African American and persons of color community. And that is this: please get to a point, and I know it won't happen right away, where you try to trust initially, but verify. That's a statement that goes, all the way back to my childhood growing up on St. Clair. Trust it, but verify. Because we need just a little bit of opportunity to gather all of the information about what may have happened. And we live in this 24-hour news cycle where things are so polarized that the moment that it happens, everybody passes judgment given their respective views. Try to do that, because we find ourselves in more instances than I care to think about where there are accusations on social media. There are things that are said when we are given a day or two to dig down into them and look at the camera footage and everything else. It didn't happen. I had a situation just 2 days ago where a woman accused our police officer, of doing all kinds of things, and then she related it to color. And she was contending that she needed emergency medical service. And she said the officer never offered it to her. And just bear with me for 1 second. I'm trying to go as fast as I can, but I think this is important. And she was insistent. He didn't do it. And then in a subsequent phone call, she said to me, and if I was a white woman, he would have asked right away. I looked at the camera footage, 47 seconds into that encounter, our Shaker Heights police officer said, "Do you need an ambulance, ma'am? Do you want me to call an ambulance?" So now, when I look at that and we go back and this officer hears that, one of the things that we face all the time is, I'm trying, but I get accused of things that I didn't even do. And we have instance after instance on social media where, we go back and look, and what's alleged to have occurred didn't even occur. So I just hope going forward, as part of this dialogue, that you accept our sincerity about trying to get better and wanting to learn and wanting to be a part of this, but come to the table and trust, but verify. And I know we're not going to get there today, but I'm just saying as a goal, because it will make things a whole lot easier if you just give us an opportunity to gather the facts, not just what people are saying, but the facts, and then come back and we can present them to you in a sincere and dedicated and honest fashion. Thank you. I know I went long, but that matters to me. It really does, because internally, you have no idea how much Jeff and I get beat up on that very issue.
Thank you for sharing that. Ms. Williams, you had a comment to make?
Thank you, Deidre. I appreciate that. And I will truly try and keep this to a couple of minutes. For those of you that don't know, I am on city council and I live in the Moreland neighborhood. And I wasn't scheduled to speak, but I wanted to share a couple of comments. But first, I wanted to make sure it was clear to anyone that didn't know that the administration and council, the police chief, the staff are all committed to doing the hard work around this work, around equity and racism and improving policing. I know that the officers, many of the officers take this work to heart. And, all of this work to me comes down to two things, whether it's policing or just addressing systemic racism, and that's about humanity and trust. And so much of the racial reckoning that we're going through now as a nation is the result of the lack of humanity or respect for the humanity, and not only people of color, African Americans, but the officers that do the work too are the people. But then there's this broken trust. And Chief, I heard you say something earlier about people hating the uniform and hating the badge. I wouldn't say that. And I know where you were going with that. But I think it's more, the bigger picture is that it's hating the racism and the feeling of being less than. So it's not you or it's not the officers. When people need help, or they need protection, they want to call you all. It's the damage that other folks have done to that institution. And so, so that's more or less all I wanted to say. Thank you for giving me that moment, Deidre.
You're welcome, and I think that everyone has made some very good, strong, valid points. And let us keep in mind that this is just the beginning of the conversations, and we do have a lot of work to do. We just need to stay the course. One thing that we need to keep in mind, I know Kim had invited quite a few people to join us, and we didn't get the turnout that we wanted, but we have enough on the call now to be able to take the information from this meeting back to share it with others and encourage and stress the importance of them being on the next call. Kim, is there anything that you want to add?
So yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, it's always important to make connections, no matter how big or small this group is right now. I think an important connection has been made with Mr. Hicks, who is the advisor for the 6th grade Scholars Boys. And I know that they will go on to follow up, you know, without Sam's. But we have a lot of scholars groups. We have a lot of scholars advisors, and we want to continue to push you know, parents and youth to these conversations, you know, of course, beyond scholars, but I was just focusing on how a connection was probably made today or reinforced. So no, other than my last question about reform and what it looks like on the streets of Shaker Heights, I really don't have any outstanding questions now. You know, I would encourage anyone who's interested to, like Dee Dee said, join us for our January conversation. You know, moving forward, we do have 5 more of these conversations to go, and each of them will have a topic. So again, other than that question, you know, what does police reform look like on the streets of Shaker Heights? As my son navigates through the city independently, how can I have a peace of mind that, oh, at least I know Shaker has tweaked this or changed that, or is focusing on something new that will help, you know, keep my son safe.
Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And I wanted to jump in. I don't want to take too much time because I know it's close to 8 o'clock. But I think the one tangible thing that you can walk away with is that police reform matrix. And what is important about that is, you know, after May 30th, not only Shaker Heights, but most every law enforcement agency in America had to take a hard, long look at the way they do their business and what needed to be changed. And we weren't any different than any other organization. What we did, though, and I think it's very important, is that we didn't jump into it and say, you know, within a month, we're going to change this, that, this, that, this, that, this, that, this, that. You know, as you will see on that matrix, you know, mainly I, and Prosecutor Keller too, consulted with, you know, guidance from professional organizations on certain proposals. We look towards guidance, from studies, professional studies that have been done in the area of law enforcement. And we also sought input, as we all know on this call, who are sitting on this call, from members of the community. And we wanted them to voice their opinion as to what they felt should be changed or what they wanted to be done. And as a result of that, we did change and amend some policies and added another one, and we will continue to do that. Is it something that you can feel right now? Maybe not. there is some change that we in the police department are going through right now. And I think it's changed for the good. And, you know, as we all know, we've been an accredited police department since 1989. And we feel that we are, and I've said it a million times, we're ahead of the curve than most other law enforcement agencies, but we still found, as a result of all of our research throughout the summer, that we did need to amend or change or add some new policies, and we're still doing that. And the short answer to the question, whether we started before or after that unfortunate incident at the debate, was, well, we started well before that. Well before that. We started, you know, almost immediately after, you know, we could all take a breath after the George Floyd incident.
Right. And, you know, with the matrix, if someone is not seeking that information, if someone is not showing the initiative to come to visit the website and seek this information out, how is this going to filter down and make it to just the common person and the regular person in the community who is not seeking it out? How can and even how can we help? But how can we know that people are educated about the changes and things that are taking place that the matrix may talk about in detail?
Right. And I think Deidre gave us the link in the group chat. When we did eventually finish that matrix, we did advertise it on our website. I believe we put it on our Facebook. So we're doing our best to try to reach out to people to let them know. And I think this is an absolute great venue for us to share that also. And we'll continue to share it. And I think the important point, Kim, is that, you know, this is the start, and this is where the roots, kind of, because if you look at that matrix and you look at all the organizations that we talked to, we researched, it's extremely important to know that a resident of the community knows that we're not just shooting from the hip with this. We tapped a lot of sources before we made any decisions. But I think you make a valid point. How do you get that out there other than sending it through snail mail to each and every resident in the community? Obviously, we're not going to do that. But, you know, in venues like this and our website and our Facebook page and Twitter, and as much as we can do to get it out there, we will.
Great. And not just to get it out there, but to also help people interpret, you know, what it is and what it means, especially for you, the people who are on the ground having these exchanges with officers. I think it's really important for them to stay aware, but we all can just really, you know, take one step at a time and make these connections and take these steps forward, which I think we have done tonight. Even though we're really a small group, I think that, you know, the work we're doing together is great. And I really do appreciate everybody taking the time tonight to be a part of this conversation. And I look forward to our next conversation. And please help mention to someone who may not know that we're doing this effort. Please help us spread the word that there's an opportunity to nurture and build this relationship with the police department. So I think that closes. We are just so on schedule. It's 8:01. And so unless anyone has any further questions or comments, our meeting will conclude.
I have one comment. Is it possible to get a copy of this video? I'm going to reach out to my colleagues that are at the middle school and the high school because I think it is very important, because I think that your police probably have more interaction with our high schoolers and our middle schoolers than they do at Woodbury. And I don't know how many of my colleagues advisors at the middle school and the high school were fully aware of this. But I want to definitely, because I gathered a lot out of this. I think this is a very open and great way to segue into reform. I still am a little vague about what is police reform. I think over the summer we heard so many different definitions from political parties as to what police reform is. So I'm actually going to look on the website to see what Shaker's response to what police reform is.
Mr. Hicks, you hit on something that's really important, and you should do that. There are approximately 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States of America and about 800,000 personnel. And it's one of the things that's unique kind of to the world, because a lot of countries have kind of federal government central standards and policies and procedures for their police. And so one of the challenges that we always face is that, you know, you have, like I said, 18,000 different versions of exactly how to interpret these standards, these policies and procedures. So that's one of the challenges that we face in the United States in terms of trying to, you know, move forward, improve in those areas, keep things at work, you know, all of the above. So you're focused in on one of the real important issues, is that there are so many different versions of quote unquote police reform, just because of the way the United States is structured, like, you know, with 18,000 different organizations that are responsible to varying and sundry local and regional governmental agencies. So your time would be well spent, you know, look at that particular nuance of police reform.
And hi, everybody. This is Jeri Chaikin. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Shaker Heights. I'm kind of in the background because I'm the technology facilitator. And we are recording this, and it was our intent to post it on the city website and also to get it to SAM so that they could post it with all their information too. So I'll be sure to get that to Kim Harris, and we will be sure to share the links with you.
And I'd like to add one last thing, and Deidre, I promise not to take too much time. I know I'm very verbose, I apologize, is that this, and I want to get to it, Mr. Hicks, this is for you, and I want to get to exactly Randy's point. So it is imperative that law enforcement agencies, police departments, police their communities according to the law, but in interpreting those laws according to what their residents of their community wants. And how they want those laws enforced to a certain extent. So when you think about police reform, and just think about Cuyahoga County, think of Shaker Heights, and how our constituents, how the residents of Shaker Heights want their community policed. Then think of Westlake. I'm sure it's vastly different as to how they want their community policed. And I think that's what Randy was getting at, is that one size does not fit all, where we probably need national standards for policing, but then they have to be flexible enough to be able to be implemented at the local level for the different cities.
That's a point very well made, and it leads for further discussion and a good segue when you are talking to other colleagues or people in your community about building the relationships and why they need to come and join us on these forums. If we do not tell the chief of police and Mr. Keller what we want to see in our community, we are going to continue to get what we get, and we can't have a fit. So we need to really look at the other areas, like he said, and see how they are being policed and what we want for ourselves, and we need to bring it to the table and have a conversation.
Thank you, GD. I'm sorry, I wanted to squeeze in real quick that, you know, this was, inviting people was very intentional. In fact, we were supposed to have this same meeting, was it I don't know, we had canceled our first scheduled time because I was hearing back from all of the people who are really already engaged, and a lot of the people I'm often in meetings with, and that is not the target audience for these conversations. So we intentionally, I reached out to people who I thought could really use this connection, and people who are not used to being invited to a table for a conversation. So that's why I'm reminding myself to have the endurance to know that, you know, it does start in small steps. So outside of scholars, you know, it's where we want to invite people who are not already tapped in or likely to seek out this information on their own. Well, thank you, everyone. Great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Stay safe
Have a
and
great
happy
evening.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thanks, Kim.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Kim.
Happy holidays, Deidre. Nice to see you.